hello to everyone just dialing in. We're just going to give it a few minutes to allow others to get on the line with us today. A warm welcome and looking forward to this conversation today. So sit tight, we'll be with you in a few minutes. So hello, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for dialing into this session today. I'm going to start off by saying a very happy International Lesbian Day to everybody, and also equally a very happy Friday. So yeah, we're delighted to have you here today, and we're going to be talking to you and providing a really rich conversation for about 30 minutes today. We've got two fantastic guests that are going to be joining me in that conversation. So we have Claire from Fidelity International, and we also have Jess from LCP. I guess that the focus of today's session is to really sort of explore some of the meanings behind some of the common terms, labels that we hear within the LGBT plus community. So we're going to look at the label lesbian, queer, but also gay woman as well. Now, International Lesbian Day is actually an annual day to actually celebrate and bring more visibility to lesbians within the LGBT plus community. And really at LGBT Great, we believe that the purpose of this date is to really shine a light on the diversity within our community, but also to really shine a light on the fantastic talent within our industry as well. So the actual sort of exact starting and foundation of this day is largely sort of up for debate, but it is believed that it first began actually in Australia and New Zealand at around sort of 1980, and then morphed into sort of a formal movement from around sort of 1990 onwards. So a bit of history for those of you who are interested today. Now, what is clear from a lot of the work that we've done, and I'm sure all of you will know this too, that we have a lot of visibility around LGBT plus men and a lot less visibility around LGBT plus women. And we want to try and be a part of sort of changing sort of this within the industry. And one of the ways that we can do that, of course, is by encouraging more people to be visible. So we're actively engaged on our Project 1000 initiative to try and achieve that. And I think we also have to think about the support that this fantastic group of people potentially seeking and sort of needs as well. What we have seen over the last 18 months is, I guess, a disproportionate impact in terms of poor mental health of LGBT women. There's some recent data that came out from the Diva magazine, which really sort of shone a light on this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these themes shortly. Now, we do want to get you thinking with us today. So we've got a couple of polls and we want to get your thoughts. So if I could ask Lauren, who's on the line with us, if we can sort of start the first poll. You're going to see that in front of you shortly. So the question today for the first one is, would you use the word queer to describe an LGBT plus identity? So you can see this here in front of you now. I'm really interested actually to get your views on this. So would you use the word queer to describe an LGBT plus identity? So I've got three options. Yes, I would use the word queer to describe an LGBT plus identity. No, I would not. And I don't have a view either way. So we've got lots of votes coming in here. This has certainly struck your interest. So thank you everybody for that. I'm going to give it a few more seconds, Lauren, just to let the final votes come in. We've got 93% who have voted, 95% there. Let's get the last two in. So would you use the word queer to describe an LGBT plus identity? If we can close the results, let's have a look at what we're seeing, Lauren. If we could share the results on the screen, that'd be great. So here we go. So we've got 49% of you that are saying no, I would not use the word queer to describe an LGBT plus identity, 12% who don't have a view either way, and then just 39% of you who are saying that you would. So interesting there. And certainly I'm not surprised by sort of those results. And I think, the word queer means obviously lots of different things for different people. And I think what we tend to see is a lot of intergenerational differences playing out as well in terms of semantics there. So thank you for sort of sharing your thoughts. I'd like to now introduce Jess and Claire. So if I can ask you to both pop your cameras on. Excellent. Look at those backgrounds, look great, don't they? Perhaps if we come to you sort of first, Jess, you want to tell us a little bit about, I guess, who you are and sort of your organisation, just to start off with.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having us here. My name is Jess. My pronouns are she, her. I am a pensions consultant at LCP. So not quite the investment industry, but we work closely with my investment colleagues. The main reason I'm here is because I identify as a woman. I also identify as a gay woman, and I'm quite comfortable with the word queer, but we'll get onto that very shortly. I'm also co-chair for LCP's LGBT plus network.
Super. Thanks, Jess. And how about you, Claire?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so my name is Claire Prendergast, and I've been at Fidelity International for about 5 years now. And similar to Jess, I co-chair our LGBT network at Fidelity. In my day job, I head up a number of our global operational teams. And looking forward to the discussion today.
Excellent. And just to sort of remind everyone dialing in today, if you have got any questions that you want to ask, you can pop those in the Q&A function. You can also do that anonymously, and then you can also chat with us as well on the chat function as well. But let's sort of perhaps dissect that poll that we just did. So I think it was 49%, majority of people said, I wouldn't use the word queer. And perhaps, Claire, if we come to you first and to get your views on this, but what do you think this is sort of telling us, and what's your own personal perspective on this?
Yeah, I think it shows that, I suppose, it certainly is a generational thing. I think historically, I would not have used the words. I think certainly for a lot of people, and Matt, we spoke about this earlier in the week, I think for a number of people, it still has quite a lot of negative connotations. People have different experiences, but at the same time, I guess in the role I have today, I'm fortunate that, I obviously spend a lot of time on this, and, I do appreciate that, people perceive the word differently now. And I think we just have to be open to both and understand why, people do perceive it differently.
Yeah, I think this point around intergenerational differences, I think is really important. And what we tend to see playing out actually in a lot of the research and the data that we do with LGBT people is that sort of part of the millennial generation and also the generations after now are sort of using the word queer quite openly, quite freely. Jess, tell us a bit about your views on this word.
So I guess for me, I was quite lucky to grow up not really having heard any of the negative connotations around queer. So I would very happily be called it. I would very happily would use it. And I think for me, queer just feels wider than the word lesbian or gay. It feels like it hits everything across that spectrum. And so it's a really good umbrella term, in my opinion, to describe something that you don't necessarily want to put it, if you don't want to put yourself in a box, queer kind of covers that as a spectrum. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting point. And I guess my view on the word queer is that, I've always been brought up with it being actually always being used in a negative way. So I tend, therefore, I don't refer to myself as queer. And I think if somebody called me queer, my initial reaction would be, actually, I feel quite negative about that. So it's really interesting, isn't it, about how, the semantics around some of these words can mean sort of different things. I guess in terms of stereotypes then, Claire, perhaps we come back to you here. When we think about the word queer, what are some of perhaps the stereotypes that you think about, with this word? What's the default thoughts from you?
I suppose it's seen, certainly from my standpoint, as quite a derogatory term. I suppose personally, I grew up in Ireland in the 1980s. It was very controlled by the Catholic Church at that time. Most of my formative years, I was, I went to a convent school. I was educated by nuns. So, certainly in terms of LGBT inclusion, it wasn't particularly on the curriculum. So, I think because of that, it would have been a term that, my peers at school would have used in quite a derogatory way. And I think because of that, because it feels quite innate, it's very hard to change your perceptions around it. So I think that's probably where my own personal views and feelings from the word, stem from.
Yeah. And I think it's this sort of, for me, I always feel like around the word there's quite a lot of stigma. And I do remember it being used in a very negative, sort of almost a bullying way, actually, when I was growing up in school. So it was never ever used in a positive context. And I think we have to be quite, quite open-minded, right, with the words that we use within the LGBT community to refer to one another. And we can't assume that one size kind of fits all. Jess, I'm keen to sort of come back to you, actually. So talk to us a little bit about where you've, seen this word used positively, and actually what's been your experience?
I mean, my experience is overwhelmingly positive. I think my generation was very much at school. The word gay was what was used as a derogatory term. Everyone said that's so gay at some point in their lives. Whereas the word queer has always just embraced sexuality, embraced gender identity. And I've seen a lot of comments in the chat already about younger generations and like LGBT plus youth preferring that term. And I think I would much rather call myself queer than have to tick myself into a box and say I was a lesbian.
Yeah. And perhaps, let's look at that word lesbian very quickly. And just before we do, let's get another data point from the audience. So Lauren, if we could just launch poll number 2. So we'll see that on the screen in front of us shortly. So the question is, what percentage of LGBT plus women identify as lesbian? So is it 72%, 52%, or 32%? And this data point, actually, just for people who are interested, came from the Diva magazine survey. This research was actually supported and sponsored by Citigroup, one of our new LGBT great members. So a quick shout out there. So approximately what percentage of LGBT plus women identify as lesbian? So it's 72%, are we 52%, or 32%? We've got 86% of you that have now voted. So I'll give it in a quick few seconds. 89% of you. Super. Let's see what the results are saying, Lauren. You can share the results as well. Perfect. So it looks like the majority of you are saying it's 32% of LGBT plus women who identify as lesbian. This is quite a surprise, actually, Claire and Jess, because obviously everyone's gone for the lowest one, but the actual answer from the research is 72%. So interesting, really interesting. And certainly, I mean, amongst my friends, I don't have many LGBT plus women friends who use the word lesbian, if at all, actually. So it's kind of come a little bit redundant. And actually, a lot of my friends refer to themselves as gay. I wonder, Claire, whether you've got any views on this yourself.
Yeah, no, very much feel the same. I don't know. There's nothing I like about the words. I don't like the way it sounds. I struggle to spell it half the time. So I think, I just have a general overall negative reaction to it. I think it goes back to my early formative years. It was probably used as quite a derogatory term, and maybe, again, very much a stereotype, and again, very much my own personal experience, but probably used to probably describe women who are maybe seen as less feminine. That's how it was used. So I never used the words to identify myself. So.
Yeah, and we've got Sue Sanders on the line today. So delighted to have you dialing in, Sue, and thank you for sharing your thoughts here. So Sue said, as an activist who's fought to be visible, always use lesbian. Comes from, I don't know how you say that word, Sapo, who was wonderful. But I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? In being visible and for the L. I mean, I think there is a lot of stereotype around the word. I mean, certainly for me, growing up in, the Northwest in Blackpool, there was always the lesbian bars, there was always the gay bars. The people who went to the lesbian bars quite often were women who decided to express their gender as more masculine. Again, lots of stereotypes around that. Jess, what are your thoughts on the word lesbian?
Yeah, I completely agree with both of what you said. And with Claire, I don't like the word, just the word in itself. It feels really close to me. And I think if you were to pick a random person on the street and ask them to define lesbian, they'd say it's a woman who's sexually attracted to another woman. And I think personally, that's not my sexuality. I'm attracted to non-binary people, I'm attracted to trans women. You know, I feel like lesbian closes me off. It sets out what my gender identity is, and it sets out what the gender identity of the person that I'm attracted to is. And that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, really. I think it has those dirty connotations. I think a lot of people feel about lesbian about the way some people feel about feminist, about how it was used in a way to mean something that wasn't positive. And I don't personally feel that way about feminist, but funnily enough, I do about lesbian.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And again, we're all a result of the environment and the conversations that we've been had, you know, etc. So Sue's written here, so crucial to reclaim both words. I think, you know, it's a great point, isn't it? You know, how do we do that? And I think we've got to be just perhaps aware of the fact that, you know, if we see a gay woman, that person may identify a lesbian, they may not. But how do we, I don't know, how do we navigate that? How do we provide the space for that conversation? Any thoughts?
It's really hard. I'm just thinking, like, I completely agree with Sue that we should reclaim both. It's just, I don't necessarily know how we reclaim lesbian without everyone suddenly going, I'm okay with lesbian, let's redefine it. And that feels like quite a big movement. But then when you've got an activist like Sue that is going to drive that forward and say, you know, lesbian doesn't close you off, lesbian doesn't confine you just to cis women. And I think it can happen. It just, I feel like the new generations are so much more fluid and so much more open to talking about sexuality that actually we probably will move away from those defined terms.
There's a point that's come here through on the chat function, which I think is interesting. So do we feel that the word gay is assumed to describe men? What are your thoughts on that, Claire?
I just think this is where it's really challenging, and I think it must be so difficult for allies, and I think we have to kind of appreciate that, because if there isn't even consensus in the LGBT community in terms of, you know, the perception of the words, what's the right word, you know, I just think we have to accept the fact that it is challenging, it's difficult, everyone's going to have a view, everyone's going to have an opinion. I think the main thing is that, you know, we encourage people to have the conversations, don't be afraid, don't worry about saying the wrong thing. We all say it, you know, and even in my role as, you know, the co-chair of the LGBT network, I mean, I get it wrong, you know, I don't know all the right answers. And I think that's really just the key message to get out there, that, you know, there are probably no right or wrong answers, you know, around this, once the intention is good. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there's a couple more points come through. So we've got Jack Williams on the line today. So hi, Jack, thanks for dialing in. And Jack's one of our former colleagues, so really pleased to have you here. But Jack's written here, so when he was at school, so gay was used as a derogatory term of choice, and therefore feel more comfortable using the word queer. I think that's an interesting point, because I mean, my experience, I'm a little bit older than Jack, but my experience is that the word gay was always used in a derogatory way as well. And I actually heard that word used within the workplace when I first came to the city, which was always used to say, you know, that's so gay, in a very derogatory way. So it's interesting, isn't it? Different experiences here. We've got Garth on the line as well from Schroders. So Garth's one of our executive sponsors and is also a mentor at the moment. So he's written here, one of my mentees described himself as queer, which I wouldn't, but actually after then it felt quite comfortable. I think there's something in that. I think it's around us owning the words we want to use as individuals and respecting and putting forward in how we identify, perhaps quite early on in some of the conversations that we have. So I think if we do that, it then potentially can make other people feel more at ease, potentially. I don't know whether you've got any sort of suggestions, Jess, in terms of how we might create that space and what these can work well.
I guess being open and being able to talk about things openly just sets the scene, and it allows you to build on that. And I think if someone identifies as queer and they tell you that's what they identify, then that's the language you should be using. You know, yes, it may make you squirm inside, but if someone says I'm a lesbian, then I will use that term for them. If someone called me a lesbian, I wouldn't be offended, to be fair. I just think if I had to choose, I'd go for the word gay. But I guess your question around creating that safe space, it's, you know, what we talk about all the time. It's all about allyship. It's all about being allies, and that doesn't just have to be heterosexual people being allies to the community, it's being allies within the community. So we talk a lot about the hierarchy within the community, with gay men being on top and lesbians being underneath. And I think actually it's great that we're doing something like this, and that, you know, Matt, you're leading this as a gay man, but you're still thinking broader than just your minority. You're thinking about the rest of the community. So be an ally, talk about it. Notice, you know, if you're on a panel and it's an LGBT panel, if there's no female representation there. Exactly.
Yeah. One other thing I'm quite conscious about as well is, you know, how all our different diversity dimensions intersect, right? So I know, you know, we know there's obviously within the industry we all work in, you know, there's a lower representation of women generally anyway. There's an even lower representation of Black and ethnic minority women within the industry. And then when we bring sort of sexuality in it as well, you know, pretty much this group of people is non-existent. And I think there's a really big part of, you know, talking and creating these spaces, but also role modeling and shining a light on the people that are there. I'm a big believer actually in the sort of the point around the law of attraction. You know, what we sort of put out and what we create is ultimately what we encourage and sort of get back. And I'm wondering, sort of, Claire, whether you've got anything to share around perhaps some of the work that, you know, Fidelity is doing specifically around role modeling LGBT plus women.
Yeah, I think probably one of the interesting components at the moment is that so both our co-chairs of the LGBT network are women, which is probably the first time that's happened at Fidelity. And I would imagine historically that's quite rare across most networks, that it's co-chaired by two women. So I think that's been a massive step forward. And, you know, I think it's definitely helped in terms of encourage more people to sign up to the network, to sign up as allies. We've definitely seen, you know, those statistics and metrics improve, you know, since we've both become co-chairs. So I think that is, you know, has been a great starting point. And then I guess overall, you know, our senior leadership at Fidelity are very supportive. You know, our own CEO, Anne Richards, you know, chaired our most recent Pride event. So again, sending a very strong message from the top as it relates to LGBT inclusion. Yeah.
And some of the things that we've seen sort of working really well within the industry, we do a lot of work obviously around mentoring, and obviously Garth mentioned it on the chat as well. And we know, you know, at senior leadership level, we have a lack of women anyway, but we definitely have a lack of LGBT plus women at the top. Jess, tell us a bit about perhaps some of the initiatives that you're sort of spearheading at LCP when it comes to talent.
Yeah, I guess to be quite honest, actually, we're quite balanced at LCP in terms of lesbian and gay representation. Excellent. And I was having a conversation with a colleague about this, and I think Claire hit the nail on the head here. If it's chaired and if it's initiated by women, you're more likely to get more women join and be part of it. So I think that's one of the key things. And one of my colleagues was saying that the other networks she's been part of, when they're initiated by men, they struggle to integrate women at a later date. So I actually think if anybody out here is thinking, why have we not got women visibility? Why are none of the women joining our network? Maybe have a look at what your high level of your network looks like and who it is that's championing it. Because I think if you can get women on board, you will see change and it will follow.
Yes.
In terms of LCP and what we're doing, we're participating in Project 1000. So I'll plug that for you, Matt. I think it's been really great because actually internally it's encouraged a lot of people to consider why they should be visible and make it, I guess, highlight what benefits it has to the junior people across the firm and, to be honest, across the industry, and seeing that impact. So we've seen quite a range of people sign up for that. And actually we've seen lots of allies jump on board as well to say, I am a safe person to speak to. I'm here to champion for you.
Yeah. I think creating that space is important, and particularly giving leaders the opportunity, you know, to support something, be involved. And I think, you know, defining one or two ways in which they can help, you know, because I think generally speaking, we are pushing on an open door when we go to leaders and say, you know, please, can you support this? But I think in my experience of doing this, one of the tips for everyone dialing in today, I think the question is, how can we make this straightforward and easy for someone? And if we can do that, people will jump behind it. So I think making it really clear is important. And perhaps, Claire, as we get into sort of the last few minutes of today, I really want to touch on the question that we looked at in terms of the role of leadership, because I know you've been working really hard, and I know same with Jess as well, to get leadership involved right across the organisation, right across geographies. Tell us a little bit about some of the work that's been happening there.
Yeah, and I think like senior leadership is absolutely key to the success. I think the grassroots, the network, is obviously really important. But without senior leadership support, I think actually getting tangible results is going to be quite difficult. So I think in recent times, we've had huge support from our senior leadership. Obviously senior leadership, they influence policies, benefits. So in the past number of years, we've been able to roll out transitioning at work policies, gender identity, gender expression policies, which are, really, really important, send a really strong message. But again, without senior leadership support, that would never happen. Even small things, we've had a huge uptake in terms of senior leaders showing their pronouns on email signatures, under Zoom IDs. So it's a small change to make, but again, sends like a really powerful message in terms of support of our LGBT employees. I'd say the final facet we've been looking at is our client journeys as well. So not only looking at our own employees and their experiences, but we've been spending a lot of time looking at our clients as well, and improving our LGBT client journeys.
Yeah, fantastic. So a whole range of different things happening. And I think, like LCP, actually, you're one of those organisations where there is such a vast range of different people involved in this, because LGBT inclusivity within the workplace is not just the responsibility and the accountability, of course, of the network. Of course, the network's a key stakeholder, but equally, we do need people right across the organisation to get involved. Jess, any sort of thoughts from you? Anything that sort of Claire said there, or anything you'd like to pick up on from the chat function?
Yeah, I was just looking at Emma's message about how their corporate email filter blocked out the word queer, which I am absolutely astonished by. So I'm glad that's being addressed. It's I guess, yeah, I'm of such a different generation that just can't understand how that's a profanity. But coming back to what Claire was saying, I think, if you were starting out at a firm and you didn't know whether you wanted to join it and you didn't know whether you wanted to work there and you're LGBT, you're going to look for your allies. You're going to look for whether there's a network, but you're going to actually look and see whether there's more support beyond that. So I think that's really key, that you have key individuals involved. And I think, my favourite champion of our network says, if you get told no, you're asking the wrong person. And he's just one of those people that you go to with a problem and he says, well, don't ask them, let's go and do this. And, I'm only a consultant at LCP, so I don't make the policies. I can only feed in the network's views. So having someone senior, having someone that's actually going to give you the time of day and isn't just going to put a statement out there, but is actually going to do the work in the background to make things happen, it's so important. Yeah, completely agree. I think, really good points. I think, Jess, whilst you might not be executive leadership, you've had a great influence on the momentum of the network, contributing towards some of the improvements as well, in terms of policy and some of the things that you're describing there. So I think, everyone's got their, role to play. And I think I'm just trying to bring together some of the themes for today. Going back to this point around language. And I think one of the things I spotted from Sue actually earlier on in the chat function is around, we do have to be completely flexible with how we use language, and be very aware about what it can mean for different people. And I think a point she also made there, I hope I've got your pronoun right there, Sue, that actually knowing the history around some of these words and the context is also important as well. And of course, why we see LGBT History Month, which in the UK is February, it's so important to look at that. And I know Sue and your organisation does a lot of work around this as well. But I think, I think the learns for me off the back of this is that we do need to be flexible, and we can't apply one word for everybody. So we've got to provide those spaces, haven't we, to have those conversations, to recognise people who identify as lesbian, to recognise those people who identify as gay women and queer as well. Really, really impressed today with the amount of sort of comments that we're getting. We should have made this 60 minutes, I think. But any sort of final points from you, Claire?
No, I mean, I think you've summed it up quite well, Matt. As I said, I think we have to acknowledge that it's a complex area.
Yes.
You know, there's no right and wrong answers. I think, you know, the main thing is that, yeah, people stay flexible, they stay open-minded, you know, they're willing to try. I think it's better to try and fail than not try at all. But yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And how about you, Jess?
I completely agree with Claire. I kind of wish I could tap away and replying to everyone and kind of engage in a deeper conversation. So if anyone does want to meet up and chat about this, I'm very keen. I just don't be scared of getting it wrong. There's nothing worse than knowing that somebody's not talking to you because they don't know what to say and they're scared of getting it wrong. Just have a conversation. If you're coming from the right place and a place of learning,
yeah,
the majority of the community are not going to be offended if you use the wrong word, if you don't get it right. You know, learn from it and move on and carry on a journey. And Claire said it earlier, we get it wrong all the time. I might be co-chair of this network, but that does not mean that I always know the right answers and always say the right thing.
Yeah, I think I on average have to apologize to someone at least once a week when I misgender, or, you know, it happens, and I do this 24/7. So, you know, it's going to happen, but what it does create is that space to have the conversation, right? And to think about, you know, how you broaden your perspective, etc. And one of the things that we do want to do, just a sort of a last quick call to action here. You know, if you do identify as lesbian, a queer woman, or a gay woman, we would love to hear from you if you are interested in being visible within the industry. You know, we do want to shine a light on more of the diversity that exists for LGBT plus women, and equally, you know, trans and non-binary sort of colleagues as well. You know, we do want to shine a light on you as well. So please do get in touch if you are interested, and you can pop me sort of a quick note on my sort of email address there. And again, you know, do link in with Claire, do link in with Jess if you'd like to continue the conversation. And finally, we will be sharing a video copy of this with you as well, and for the people that didn't have time to sort of dial in today. But yeah, on behalf of LGBT Great, thank you very much for joining us today, and yeah, wishing you all a great weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jess.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.